stay tuned because for the next 60 minutes, Motorsports Unlimited is on the air. Hi, I'm Jerry Bryant, and these are the lovely ladies of motorsports. And all this hour, we're going to have 60 minutes of action-packed excitement. All kinds of exciting things will happen. And we got the famous Bill Wildt, and we got all kinds of other good stuff that's happening all this hour. Motorsports Unlimited, 60 minutes of non-stop action. So let's go to the studio right now.
Thanks, Jerry, and hi, everybody. Welcome to the studio headquarters of Chicagoland's most watched, most talked about Access television series. I'm Samantha Bentley, and this is the 1159th edition of Motorsports Unlimited. This is part 2 of our motorcycle road trip to Vintage Days held at Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course. If you'll recall, last week, Bill traveled from Chicago to the Mid-Ohio facility with a stop at Plymouth Speedway in Plymouth, Indiana. He arrived at the Mid-Ohio track only to find the day's festivities were over.
That they're closed today because it's already, it's 6 o'clock our time. That'll be 7 o'clock their time, I guess. Well, I guess I'm going to have to find out.
It was 7 p.m. and the 3-day event hours were 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. He left the track in search of a difficult-to-find motel room during Vintage Days. Rode about 10 miles west to Galion, Ohio, where he succeeded in finding an available room. The following morning, he looked out the motel door only to find it had been raining all night, and the weather forecast indicated severe storms for the next couple of days. What to do? Here he was, all the way in the middle of Ohio in search of vintage motorcycles that would help him tell the story of the technical evolution of motorcycles. And it looked like Mother Nature was going to defeat his efforts. It was unlikely many would bring out their classic machines in dismal weather. While he looked out the motel room, he noticed 2 classic bikes in the parking lot with their owners loading up. These were bikes he wanted to include in his story anyway, so he decided to strike while the iron was hot and at least get 2 threshold machines on the show, and worry about what was going to happen at Mid-Ohio later.
Well, folks, we're trying to make the best of a bad situation here. As hard as it rained, I'm a little concerned. We're about 10 miles away from the Mid-Ohio track, and I'm certainly going to make my way over there, but I'm afraid I'm going to be in a quagmire once we get there. And we had 2 great, I already pointed out, we had 2 great vintage bikes right across the parking lot, and I happened to catch these guys, and they agreed to participate in an interview. First of all, you are?
I'm Skip Hatch.
Where are you from, Skip?
Corpus Christi, Texas.
And as I understand it, you're an old flat tracker. You're not an old flat tracker. You're a used-to-be flat tracker.
I flat tracked at one time, yes, as a matter of fact. And
what years?
From about 62 to about 72. Flat tracked and desert racing, a little of everything. And it was sure a lot of fun.
Wasn't it the best?
It was, yeah, the best. Yeah, it was. It really was.
And I guess that's why you show up at Vintage Days.
That's one of the reasons. I'm a vintage, and these are vintage, and we're having fun.
Okay, tell us about this one. First of all, I can give you a little history of the Norton, and you can correct me where I'm wrong, then fill me in on this one specifically. The reason I know about Nortons, my good friend Todd had a Norton Manxman. Do you remember the Manx? Not the Manx, the Manxman.
The Manxman, it was a twin, 500 or
650.
650 cc, yeah.
Because the early Nortons were 600s, they were the Dominators.
Yeah.
Then became, and nobody remembers the Manxman. It was only like for a year, 650, and then became the Atlas, the 750.
This is the Atlas, the 750.
There you go.
Yep.
Give me the details on this one.
This is a 1965 Atlas. It's pretty much all basically stock as it was when it came from wherever it came from, England. And I've had it for a number of years now, and I enjoy it. It's not something that you want to ride from here to Texas, but it's something that's real fun to get out and ride, and it's rare and it's comfortable.
Well,
It's a nice bike.
Norton was always famous for its what they called their featherbed chassis
Featherbed frame, yeah.
frame, and their forks were also very well known.
Road holder forks, and this has both.
Has both, and as a matter of fact, the one thing all the British bikes, at least back then, were famous for, they didn't run when it rained, and I noticed that you had a cover over them.
We had a cover over them, and of course the lights, John Lucas lights, there's 3 positions, off, flicker, and dim.
you know British bikes.
Yeah. Gentlemen don't motor about in the dark is what the Lucas motto was.
There's so many old jokes, the reason the British have warm beer, the Lucas refrigerators. And
Yeah.
yeah. Anyhow, so this is then a 750 Atlas.
750 Atlas, 1965.
And how long did Norton go before they folded?
Actually, they were the last of the British companies to go under, and they probably well into the 80s. They were making police bikes and stuff for the UK, and they even had a rotary engine for a while there.
Yes, I recall they were working in that
Yeah.
development. Now, as far as the 4-stroke engines, did they always have separate engine and trans, or did at some point they go to a unit construction?
No, they never went to the unit construction in the big twins. The smaller bikes, the 400s and stuff, had a unit construction, but the bigger bikes always used the same engine cases and transmission system. Yeah.
Okay, is there anything particularly interesting about this particular Norton Atlas that I haven't mentioned that you'd like the audience to know about?
No, it's just a plain old ordinary Norton Atlas.
Okay, pretty special now. This was time, again, this is actually past my teenage years. This is something that you would have, if you were a young guy back in the 60s, you would have died to have a Norton Atlas.
This was the hot rod.
This was really a hot rod, it really was. But he's got another vintage bike here, which I can't even believe is already vintage. At one time, it was my favorite motorcycle. It's got more cylinders, more valves, more cams than any other motorcycle. So I'm going to love it, and we're going to look at that next.
Bill says the Norton Atlas and subsequent models based on it, like the Norton Commando, were a big deal in the early 60s because they were 750s, while their primary competitors, Triumph and VSA, were 650s. This was before the Japanese changed the face of motorcycling. The Honda Superhawk was still only a curiosity, and the world-changing Honda CB750-4 was almost a decade away. In its own way, the Norton Atlas changed motorcycling because until it came along, the standard large displacement British motorcycle was a 650. With the Norton Atlas, the new standard became 750. Hi, I'm Janine Lauschat. Now, Bill would have liked to do this technical history in progressive order, but the weather forced him to take the machines as he came upon them. The next bike represents something of the ultimate in technical advancement. It was a stunning technical achievement in 1978 when introduced, and many consider it the most advanced motorcycle in history, even by today's standards. One of Bill's all-time favorites, the Honda CBX.
Well, folks, I think you can see when I'm talking about more cylinders, more valves, more cams, the happier I am. If you can see the pipes, and I know you can because that's the way I set up the shot, we've got 6 pipes sticking out of the front of this engine. That means we've got a 6-cylinder. This is Honda's famous CBX. And why am I talking about it? I've got a guy here that knows all about it. First, once again, reintroduce yourself to the audience.
Hi, I'm Skip Hatch from Corpus Christi, Texas.
Now tell us about your CBX.
This is a 79. It was the first year that they came out with these CBXs. It's 6 cylinders, double overhead cam, 4 valves per cylinder. It was the first real super hot rod, the Super Sport that they came out with. There were some other bikes, 4 cylinders and stuff, but this is the only big hot rod 6 that was ever made. It was only made for 4 years. 79 and 80 was like this model here. 81 and 82 they came out with a fairing and a monoshock and stuff, but they never really were very popular. This is the model. This is it. This is the one you need. This is the one you want.
This is the hot rod. As a matter of fact, it came in 2 colors. You either had the gray or you had the red.
You had silver or red. That was it.
That's correct. And as a matter of fact, what Honda, because it wasn't a big seller, and for the life of me, I don't know why. Maybe because everybody in the world isn't like me and likes lots of cylinders, lots of valves, lots of cams. But as a matter of fact, I remember one of the write-ups in the magazine where the writer was kind of being critical and said, the engine looks like an aluminum fence. And I said to myself, no, you're saying it wrong. the engine looks like an aluminum fence. I thought it was so cool.
That's it, exactly. That's it, exactly. You know, I love this bike. I've had it for 15 years or so now, and it's not for sale.
Well, no. These at this point you don't even sell these. They only been for 4 years, and you're right. By the way, I think the second or third year they started putting fairings on them and blended in saddlebags. I think they were trying to find the right market for it.
Yeah, they were trying to sell it as a touring bike when it's not really. It's a sport
hot
bike.
rod. It's a hot rod, no doubt about it.
Strictly a hot rod.
As a matter of fact, if I remember right, 1,025 cc's.
1,025. It also has 6 carburetors, and this gets about 28 miles to the gallon.
Really?
Yeah, it's not efficient.
Well, it also strikes me as you lean on it pretty hard.
It wears tires out fast too.
Yeah, I'll bet it wears them out all by themselves. What kind of RPM range does it?
Well, it's not all that high RPM considering what they have now. About 9,000 is maxed out, but it'll do that most of the day.
Well, I'll tell you what a stickler I am, and this is one of the reasons that I wanted to do this thing from vintage days. I was hoping I'd find bikes like this because these were really important. I loved, first of all, the reason to do an inline 6 is that an inline 6 is an inherently balanced engine. I won't go into all of the things about engine balancing, but there are certain configurations that are inherently balanced. An inline 6 is, an inline 4 is not, an opposed 4 is, an opposed 6 is, and when you start with an inline 6, you start with a perfectly balanced engine. However, Honda really bugged me on this one. This won't make any difference to anybody in the world but me. The N2 cylinders, they actually trimmed the flyweights on the crankshaft because they wanted to get some cornering clearance to get a little tighter. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, they did.
And that just bugs me because they gave away a little of that perfect balance that it came with.
Yeah.
So you know the same thing then?
Yeah, it's in order to make them a little bit narrower, they had to trim them down a little bit. And
Just
there was
the
a
end
lot
cylinders,
just,
yeah.
Just the 2 end ones, but it's still smooth. You can still see stuff in the mirrors on this one.
I'm just a nut.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
And do you still enjoy riding it then?
Oh, yeah. I don't ride long distances, but I ride frequently. I mean, I might ride 2 or 3 times a week.
How does this thing perform compared to modern certain bikes like Hayabusas, things like that?
Well, it can't really hold a candle to them. It's good for 130 miles an hour, and they're good for 170. So
they're unbelievable, the performance that they're putting out there.
Modern technology it's unbelievable, but still, this was the first.
This was the first, and still to this day, the most cylinders, the most cams, the most valves, the most all of the stuff technical.
And the most fun.
And the most fun. This guy's got the right idea.
Skip is the right person to own the fabulous Honda CBX. He appreciates it. He told Bill to make sure he got some audio when they started it. Hi, I'm May Chin. Make sure you listen carefully to the sweet sound of the Honda 6. It's the one that sounds like a Porsche.
The British Vertical Twin, the bike that just left, is the sound Bill and his friends loved many years ago, and many still do, until the high RPM multi-cylinder Japanese invasion occurred. Bill still loves the sound of the British Twins, but finds the howl of the Japanese super bikes irresistible. Hi, I'm Amber Alvarado, and I must admit, I don't understand much of this, but the guys sure seem enthusiastic. Bill decided it was time to head for the Mid-Ohio Sports Car Course.
Well, let's see if I can weave between the puddles here. Unbelievable. Just finished up with the CBX and the Norton Atlas, and the sun came out with a vengeance. All the weather forecast on TV is not promising. More storms coming through. Let's see, this is called what? The Rainbow Motel. We're about 10 miles, I would say, west. 10 miles west of the Mid-Ohio track in a town called well, I'm going to say it wrong. I'm going to say Galena. I'm not sure if that's correct. But it makes a point. There's a point that I want to make. I've had several people comment on the motorcycle road trips about how I try to go to the ma and pa motels and for that matter, restaurants and things like that, rather than the chains. That I actually enjoy doing that, and maybe because, as regular viewers know from the New York trip, that I remember how hard my parents worked with the Whitestone, the restaurant and motel, and I sort of respect people that put in so much effort at the smaller places trying to compete. And this place, if you'll notice, is called Grandma's Kitchen. Kind of a tidy-looking little restaurant. Boy, did that turn out to be just excellent. And again, I've had people email me and comment that, am I not concerned about what I might find in these small places? And it's true. You're always taking a chance, because the chains, you always know what you're going to get and all that. But I've got to tell you something. Sometimes it really, really turns out well. I remember on the Sweetwater, Tennessee trip, that Hilltop Motel. Boy, was that excellent. And kind of the same thing here, the Rainbow Motel. Clean, terrific shower. I really enjoyed it, as well as the little restaurant next to it, not connected with chains of any kind. Very cool. I just think it's worth taking those chances. Yes, sometimes it doesn't turn out well, but this time it turned out extremely well. Obviously, I'm pleased. Now, let's see. I'm on 61, and they told me just to follow 309 until I get to 314 to get back to the track, so I'm taking a little chance here. Yesterday, I went back to Route 30, and they're all looking at me, oh, no, that's way out of your way. Just stay on 309 until you get to 314. They'll take you right to the track. So, I'm going to try it. And once again, I can't quite figure out the weather. Everything is wet, I mean really wet, so you've got to be careful riding. But the sun keeps popping through. So, we'll see.
Until he got to 314, where he turned south. 314 did indeed take him back to the track. By the time he got there, the sun was, once again, out with a vengeance, and there were thousands of motorcycles there. He decided to seize on the first threshold motorcycle, with its owner, he encountered and get started before the weather changed again.
Well, folks, welcome to the craziest day on Motorsports Unlimited. I don't know what's crazier, the weather or the circumstances for getting in this place. I cannot tell you what it's like to have 50 to 60 to 70,000 motorcycles congregating in one place, and then a bunch of guys with trailers and RVs and all the rest of it. It's crazy. I spotted a guy that had a unit construction BSA. We'll explain what that means in a moment, but first let me introduce him, and you are?
Chris Gehring.
Where are you from, Chris?
Dover, Ohio.
Okay, that's the last time we'll talk to him, because if you know Motorsports Unlimited, we always talk to the pretty girls, and you are?
Cindy Gehring.
Okay, also from?
Dover, Ohio.
Okay, can you tell me about the bike, or do I have to actually talk to him?
He builds them for me to ride.
Did you ride this here?
We have others.
You have more than one?
Yes.
I guess I'm talking to the right people.
Yeah, we have chopper bobbers, 1966 and a 1961.
All right, here's the thing. Our regular audience is familiar, of course, is I've had an A10 BSA. It was one of the best bikes that I had throughout my youth. I very much enjoyed it. It was an A10 BSA, and the A10 BSA was a separate engine and transmission construction. What I always wanted, what I always lusted for as a young man was something like this. This is when they changed the engine transmission design to a unit construction. Tell us about it. What have we got here, year, make, model?
It's a 1970 BSA Lightning.
They made the unit construction engine, now I'm reaching back 50 years here. They made a Hornet, which was the off-road model with high pipes. They made the Lightning, but they made a single carb model. What was that one?
That was a Thunderbolt.
Thunderbolt. Okay,
Yeah.
So boy, my memory is really. Anything you'd like to know? How many speed transmission?
It's 4-speed transmission, 650 cc's, and I put the short pipes on it for it to be a little louder. They're pretty quiet with the stock pipes on it.
Yes, and on these early bikes, I can tell you, folks, it almost doesn't make any difference what pipes. You know, the modern Japanese motorcycles are very pipe sensitive, but the early ones, they really weren't.
Right. All you have to do is rejet it and make it run better.
Absolutely.
Or right.
And I should say for her, because you're the one that actually rides, right?
Yes, I am.
Well, listen, thanks for spending a little time with us. Great bike. Unit construction, BSA. Unit construction started what year?
Unit construction started in 63.
63. Starting in 63, my bike was a 58, so I was a long way from a unit construction BSA.
Unit construction, meaning the engine and transmission are one piece, was really brought to America's attention by modern Japanese motorcycle designs beginning in the late 50s with the all-important Honda Super Hawk. As a matter of fact, despite its small size, the Super Hawk brought a whole host of modern high-tech engineering features that revolutionized motorcycling. It was a bike Bill really wanted to include, and he found one.
Okay, this poor fellow doesn't know what he's in for because I have to start this with my little story, and our regular viewers are going to be tired of hearing this because they've already heard it before. But for those who haven't heard it, it's important to introduce this motorcycle. In 1959, my little brother, he was 3.5 years younger than me, my little brother Eric, bought a motorcycle, a Japanese motorcycle, which we had only vaguely heard of at the time. Of course, at that time, I had my Harley Davidson, a KHK 55 cubic inch flat hood, and I think at that point I'd gotten rid of my BSA 810, I'm not really sure. Point was, he got the bike, I saw it sitting in the yard, and he says, "Yeah, Bill, I just bought that." And he says, "What do you think?" I said, "Oh, cute bike, here, let me try it." And I rode it around the block, and I said, "Yeah, that's pretty cute. Gee, it's got an overhead cam, and electric start and doesn't seem to leak oil. Yeah, that's pretty cute, Eric." And gave it back to him and went back in there. Because, I'm a Harley guy. I had big stuff, A couple of weeks later, I'm leafing through the owner's manual, which happened to be laying on a dining room table. And as I'm leafing through, I noticed the RPM, the red line. And the red line was like 10,000 RPM. And I look at that and I said, must be metric RPM. Because a Harley, you couldn't rev over about 4,000, 45 at the very most. Even my BSA, you were testing it if you were up past $5,000, maybe 55, 10 grand. That's absolutely unheard of. You wouldn't even think of doing something like that. 10,000? I flipped on to the next page and I said, wait a minute, there's no metric RPM. It can't be metric RPM. There's revolutions per minute. Eric, let me have your key. So I went and took the bike out for another ride, and this time pulled the trigger on it. And the time before, I didn't go over about 3,500, 4,000 RPM. Well, let me tell you, when attack hit 6,000, that thing put the front wheel in the air and hauled. And I spent the rest of the afternoon chasing after my buddies with their Triumphs and BSAs and toasting them. And we came up with the conclusion that day that if the Japanese ever made a big bike, the rest of us are screwed. Well, I've got a fellow that has an example of the bike. What do you think of my little history thing?
I think it's very accurate. They actually, Honda came out with these in 61. And this is a Super Hawk. It's 300 cc's. It was the first 100-mile-an-hour production motorcycle that was introduced.
Okay, first of all, you are?
Bill Orazio from Covington, Louisiana.
Okay, and give us the make, year, and model of what we've got here.
This is a 1964 CB77. It was nicknamed the Super Hawk in the U.S., but its actual model number is a CB77. It's 305 cc's.
Okay, well, I'm a lot older than he is, so I can give you a little bit of the history, and then he can fill in the blanks where I'm wrong, because this guy is an expert on this. How many Hondas do you have?
Pretty close to 100.
Right, but I'm an expert on the history of that period because I went into high school in 1957 and had a motorcycle at 57, so I watched the comings and goings of all the motorcycling thing very, very well. And I can tell you what happened. Honda came first with this, and he just corrected me. I said Bentley. I've always said Bentley. It's Bentley.
Bentley.
B-E-N-L-Y.
Correct.
Right, which was a little 50cc thing that had skirts in front of it and all that. Was definitely...
No, that was the Cub.
The Cub? Okay.
That was the Cub.
Whatever it was before, because a lot of people will say those were the first Hondas in this country, and they may have been, but I can tell you, I was there, nobody cared. It wasn't a motorcycle as far as we were concerned. Then along comes something called the Honda Dream, which was very much like this, except it had kind of a square headlight and deeply balanced fenders. It was very Asian. We turned our backs on that too. We didn't care about that at all. But what we did care about was when they came out with, and I thought it was Honda that came out, and you tell me the American company put it on there, when they came out with the 305 Super Hawk, because it had a British look. It had the British looking fenders, the British looking instruments. It looked more like what we were used to with Triumphs and BSAs, and that's when we started taking them seriously. Does any of this make any sense?
Yes, sir. It was the tubular bars. The Americans wanted the tubular bars like the British bikes and the Harleys. They didn't like the pressed steel bars like the Cubs. And
nor did we like those deeply balanced pressed steel fenders.
Correct. They liked the tubular frames, tubular bars, 18-inch wheels, and basically the more sportier models.
Right, and more British looking, let's face it. They looked more like the Triumphs and BSAs at the time. And that's where the term Universal Japanese Motorcycle came from, because the next model after the 305, if I remember right, was the 350 Honda, and that was even more British-like in that it had the separate tach and speedometer, am I correct?
Correct, yes, sir.
So they went even more towards the British look, and that term UJM, Universal Japanese Motorcycle, came along. And what they really did, let's face it, is they outdid everybody. Here we're talking about overhead cam engine. It would rev 10,000 RPM when everything else out there was at 4,000 or 5,000 at most. And the performance was absolutely astonishing. And I don't know if Honda will admit it, but that's what sold Honda in this country, was the performance.
Yes, sir. Like I said, it was the very first 100-mile-an-hour production motorcycle that was offered in the U.S.
As a matter of fact, you told me an interesting story of how the Honda came, the 300cc model became known as a Dream.
It was anything over 250 Honda called a Dream, and they actually still call them in a lot of other countries. They call them Dreams, even the 750s. But back in the mid 40s, Mr. Honda was trying to. His accomplishment was to make it up Mount Fuji on a motorcycle, and the first bike he did it on, he called a Dream, because that was his dream. And it was actually.
And what size was that?
About a 250cc bike. So that from there on, they called everything from their larger displacement bikes a Dream.
You know, it's actually very interesting, because when you look at the machines today, they do have a little bit of an Asian look to them. Even the ones that were sort of Britishized, they have a little bit of an Asian look to them. It's really the performance that really sold them well. But they were all oddball engine sizes. At that time, we were used to 125s, 250s, 500s, and 650s. 305, what is that? It doesn't fit in anywhere.
It was 305 cc's, but everybody still called it a 300. Honda even offered it as a 300cc bike. They advertised it as 300 because they knew the 305 was an odd size.
So was 300. Apparently they didn't know that.
Yes, sir. But the 250 actually came out first with the 250, and just for like another $40 you could buy the 300. So the 250s, of course, were not very popular in the U.S.
Right. As a matter of fact, the Honda changed a lot here. They almost seem to ignore the traditional displacement levels that we were accustomed to, and kind of started their own. But for those that think that the Japanese took over the motorcycle world because of low prices, I can tell you it wasn't true. The 305 Super Hawk was actually a little more expensive than like a 250 BSA or 200 Triumph Tiger Cub or anything like that. The Honda was actually a little bit more. They didn't sell it with price; they sold it with technical excellence.
Yes, sir. And also all the sport bikes, Honda had intended for them to be raced, so they made a lot of race parts for them, factory race parts. So he actually intended for these super sports to be made into race bikes, the scramblers to be made into off-road bikes. So they were made race pieces for him so you could race them.
Now I'm going to test his real Honda status. Here's a guy with 100 Honda motorcycles. Can you say the original Mr. Honda's first name?
It's Shiroshio.
How do you say it?
Shiroshio.
You don't really know either, do you?
That's the way
is it Shiroshio? Is that how you say it?
That's the way it's been told to me.
Okay, yeah, same thing with me. I don't have a clear definition. Shiroshio. Anyhow, but one of the things he was a fascinating engineer. First of all, he started his company, maybe you don't know this, as a piston ring manufacturer.
Yes, sir.
You knew
Sure
all that.
did.
Sure did. And it turned out to be a bigger task than he thought it would be. But that isn't the end of the story with Honda, is that he was a brilliant engineer. A lot of people wondered, for example, in 1969 when he came out with the CB750, which once again revolutionized motorcycling forever. But why a four-cylinder? Well, the reason was, and I'd read a lot of articles about this, during interviews he said he would never make an engine that had a cylinder displacement larger than 200 cc's because the volumetric efficiency drops off so drastically after 200 cc's, it's not worth doing. So as he went to, for example, the 305s, that was a two-cylinder. When he decided to go to a 750, it was automatic in his mind to go to a four-cylinder engine just to have the great volumetric efficiency. I don't know if you're familiar with that. I'm kind of a technical guy.
I've heard some stories about that also.
Right.
I think a lot of Mr. Honda's design on the motorcycles was really done because his main goal was he wanted to race cars, and he built the motorcycles and did a lot of the engineering and R&D with the motorcycles, I guess, because it was a lot less expensive to build a motorcycle engine than a car engine. So a lot of the R&D was done for the car racing also.
Well, he and I have a similar background then, because the reason I got into motorcycle racing because they drove me out with cost in stock car racing. So that's how I ended up in motorcycles. But anyhow, one more quick comment about that is that he was so dedicated to the principle of small but multiple cylinder engines, but small displacement cylinders, that for example, his 250cc road racing bike, world-class road racing bike, was a six-cylinder 250, and his 125, I don't know if you know all this, was a five-cylinder. You know all this.
5-cylinder, 125.
5-cylinder, and that it shouldn't be any surprise when he came out with the CBX with this 6-cylinder 1025cc engine.
Yes, sir. I think the CBX was like half of a Indy car engine. That's what I was told. It was half of a car they were developing for Indy.
Brilliant piece of work, and there's no one that can fault the engineering from Honda. There's no, even to this day.
Correct. And I don't know if you're familiar, but the 5-cylinder 125 you were speaking about earlier, it actually, this rev limit was 26,000 RPMs.
26,000 RPM, and this was what year?
66.
Yeah, so if people think there's anything new
66.
out there, it really has to do with volumetric efficiency, and the reason for this, by the way, as was explained to me many times by really good engineers, the problem is what you're doing with the cylinders, you're filling and emptying the cylinder. And it's easier to fill and empty a small cylinder than it is a big cylinder. So the smaller the cylinders, the easier to fill and empty, and the greater volumetric efficiency. Of course, the other end of that, in the case of the CBX Honda, you end up with an engine that is so wide, it's like a car.
Correct.
So there are some trade-offs. Anyhow, is there anything else you want to? First of all, great bike. I'm glad to see somebody has one of these in original condition. I see that it's got dual leading, there's still drum brakes, but dual leading shoe front brakes.
Yes, sir. There are drum brakes that didn't come out, of course, so about 73 Ford disc brakes. But these are just great bikes. They're very efficient to ride. You can still pick them up. Good deals like at this meet that you're at right now. And it's a lot of fun, good investment. You can buy and sell them, ride them, enjoy them. And they're just starting to get actually getting some good magazine coverage on a lot of these bikes. It's becoming a pretty good following on all the vintage scene.
And I will tell you from personal experience, the 305 Superhawk would break 100 miles an hour.
Oh, yes.
Because I did it.
103.
Because I did it. It was a very, very fast motorcycle. Anyhow, thanks for spending a little time with us. Once again, folks, this is a motorcycle. Make no mistake about it. This changed the history of motorcycling. When Honda came out with this, with the electric starting, oil-tight, overhead cam, absolute reliability, it just totally revolutionized motorcycling.
Bill says the impact of the Honda Super Hawk on motorcycling cannot be overstated. It was truly a threshold machine that influenced every motorcycle designed after it was introduced. Now, with the sun blazing, Bill decided to take care of business at the front gate.
I suppose I should have started with this shot, but I actually couldn't, because when I arrived here in the morning, and yes, it was morning, when I arrived here a couple of hours ago in the morning, it was absolutely packed. In fact, the cars were, well, you can't see it from here, but there's like 4 lanes trying to get in all the gates here and buy tickets and all that, and it was backed up all the way out into the street and down the street. It was absolutely jam-packed. There are thousands and thousands of people here for Vintage Days. I came back out because I mentioned to Pat Gelso, Pat, and he said he was just thinking about it. If you're going to go, I'll meet you at the front gate at noon. So I made sure at 11:30 I was out here until about, right now it's about 11:45. So I'm guessing he's not going to make it, but I wanted to make sure that I was here just in the unlikely event that he did come, that I didn't disappoint him. Anyway, we're going to go back in now because I just see one great bike after another going in. Problem I'm having here is the same problem I have at all the car shows. People don't stay with their bikes. I see all these great bikes and I can't find the owners, but I'll bet I find enough.
Finding the owners with their vehicles at the time we are ready to shoot is always a problem, and even more so at this event. The people attending are there to look at other bikes, not display their own. Bill decided to take things into his own hands and use a different technique, as he is about to explain.
Well, folks, it's been a wild day for me between running in and out of the raindrops and brilliant sun and then threatening rain and howling wind from time to time and tying down the tripod and all the rest of it. But my biggest problem has been finding people with their bikes. All the history of motorcycling is here. If you were to be here in person, and always remember what I tell you all the time, I can only bring you a tiny piece of anything we cover. You have to go in person to really appreciate these things. But the whole history of motorcycling is here. Problem is, the guys come, they park their bikes, and they leave, and I can't do anything with them without their bikes. So I came up with a new technique, and this poor fellow is the first guy I tried it on. I'm catching these guys riding down the road and pulling up next to them and asking them to do a television interview. At least I got them with their bike, and you are.
I'm Bruce Heron.
Where are you from, Bruce?
I'm from Canada, Toronto.
Really? You came all the way down from Canada?
Yes.
Did you ride this all the way down?
Yes.
No trailering, come on.
No trailering. I wrote it down. I brought it here last year, too.
Well, that's quite an accomplishment, and I'll tell you what, this is a very important machine. When I spotted him, I kind of chased him for probably several minutes before I caught up to him coming across the passenger way and all that. Because the reason this is important is a lot of people have forgotten already, being that all of the motorcycle manufacturers build only 4-cycle motorcycles now. The fact of the matter is, in the early days, only Honda was a 4-stroke motorcycle manufacturer. That Suzuki, Yamaha, and Kawasaki were all 2-strokes, and they had some great 2-strokes.
Yes.
And I would say this thing, and what do we affectionately call this?
This is called the Water Buffalo here in North America.
Right, this is the Water Buffalo, and the reason it's a Water Buffalo is this is a 3-cylinder 2-stroke liquid cooled, without question, the final statement of 2-cycle motorcycles. Before we get into that, tell me about this bike specifically, make your model.
This is a 1973. That's the second year they made them. The first year they had a drum brake, and this year they put double discs on it.
How long did they go with the Water Buffalo?
They went through to 1977.
Through, and that was the end of it?
Yeah, 72 to 77.
Okay, and none of the manufacturers make 2 cycles anymore. There might be an oddball here and there, but they're all 4 cycles now. What was important about this was I remember very well because I was a professional flat track racer and we had 250 singles at the time, 2-strokes, and they were god-awful fast.
Yes.
And somebody says,
yeah,
and somebody says, you know, that new Suzuki is 3 250s in one chassis. And I said, wow, and these things are fast.
They're fast. But they're a very low torquey engine for a 2-stroke.
Well, that was the almost disappointing thing to us because at the time I was very young and I was looking to lay my ears back and go. Yeah. And when I rode it, it was like a normal motorcycle. It had good low end torque and all that. But I don't have to tell you, a lot of the guys took these and built road racers out of them, and for that matter, some race cars out of this engine.
Yes, apparently the racing model of this bike, they had trouble keeping tires on it.
There's no question that you could easily, I can tell you, I had friends of mine that road race these things, you could easily pull 150 horsepower out of this thing.
Yeah, and in stock they're 67.
Yes, so you're doubling and maybe tripling the horsepower, and of course you're running them over 10,000 RPM. What RPM do you run at this one at?
The red line is 7, but it's very seldom that you go over 4. 4 is 80 miles an hour.
And that's where it pulls nice and strong and hard?
4 is where it really starts to pull, yeah.
Okay, and how about how many speed transmission?
It's a 5-speed transmission, and it'll pull 5th at 2,500 RPM.
And how many, when you're at cruising speed, say on a highway, 70, 75 miles an hour, is it able to cruise all right at that?
Yeah, we came up here between 75 and 80 miles an hour, and that's just around 4,000, just a little below 4,000 RPM.
Well, I've got to ask you the question that every 2-stroke fan out there is wondering right now. What kind of oil do you use?
Well, that's the problem. When you start going those speeds, you do start using some oil.
Right, it's oil injected, we should say.
It's an oil injected machine, total loss, and it's a 2-stroke oil that you use, so I end up using snowmobile oil.
Sure, and that's an excellent choice.
Yep.
All right, folks, the one thing I do want to mention is that make no mistake about it, there's nothing wrong. I happen to be a 2-cycle fan. I spent years riding 2-cycle motorcycles, and I can tell you, when it comes to performance per pound, they are the lightest pieces of machinery you can get to produce incredible amounts of horsepower. Agreed?
That's quite true.
Right.
The amount of horsepower you can get out of a 2-stroke is like twice out of as a 4-stroke.
As a 4-stroke, at least double out of them. There was nothing wrong with that, and the only reason all of these 2-cycles, and when I say all of them, believe me, Suzuki had a whole line of 2-cycle motorcycles. They had 2-cylinders, 1-cylinders, 3-cylinders, and a wide variety of machines. Yamaha had a wide range. In fact, some people would say the 350 Yamaha was one of the fastest bikes ever made.
The Yamaha was a very neat machine. It was.
Very cool machine, yeah. And all of these things are not gone because there was anything wrong with the machine. It had to do with the EPA and government standards and all the rest of it.
It's unfortunate. It's the burning oil, which the surprising thing is outboard motors and snowmobiles still use 2-stroke engines.
Let me make my little speech. I'm sure nobody's going to listen to Bill Wildt, but I try anyway. anything, any EPA, any government regulations that are targeted to motorcycles, to outboard motors or anything like that are just bureaucratic terrorism, plain and simple. There are too few, the engines are too small, they're used too seldom to have any environmental impact whatsoever, including them with automobiles and trucks and buses. It's like including snowblowers and lawnmowers. Come on, you guys have lost your brain. You've lost your minds.
Yeah. It's a shame because these machines
are great
going to
bikes.
go.
No, they will. These will disappear. You've probably got one of the last original. That's why I spotted it. I said, boy, there's an original bike.
Yeah.
Is everything original on it?
Yes, it is. Everything is original.
And you still ride it. That's so cool.
It's got 51,000 miles on it right now.
That is so cool that you still ride it. It's a great bike. And again, nothing wrong with these two cycles. These were great engines. What I am surprised at is the low RPM that it operates at. That surprises me.
It's very low for a two-stroke, but it's even low for a normal motorcycle. A 750 Honda, which is what this was created to compete against, is running about 4,800.
Right. We should say that the CB750 Honda, which absolutely, like I explained earlier, the Honda Super Hawk totally revolutionized motorcycles with the modern high-tech overhead cam oil-free. What I'm trying to say is didn't leak oil. Didn't leak oil with overhead cams and high RPM capabilities and absolute reliability. Honda really revolutionized motorcycling with that.
They changed the world with it.
They changed the world, and then they changed it again in 1969 with the CB750. They totally revolutionized, and this was Suzuki's answer to the 750 Honda was a 750 4-cylinder 4-stroke, and this is Suzuki's 3-cylinder water-cooled 2-stroke, which really ran every bit as well as the 4-cylinder Honda.
Yep. This was a direct competition to it, and I think they did a better job with this. It's a better highway machine, actually.
And a lot of people, I'll tell you what,
biased, though.
He's biased, but actually he's not wrong, because there are people to this day will argue tooth and nail that two-stroke displacement ought to be, they're not correct, but two-stroke displacement ought to be considered double because it fires on every stroke. So this is a 750, it ought to be considered a 1500 cc. And it's not true, because every gulp that it takes isn't as efficient as a 4-stroke. So even though there are twice as many, it's an argument that will never end, except it's been ended by the government. There's no more two-strokes on the street.
That's true.
Okay, is there anything I missed on your bike that you're proud of, or anything about the Suzuki Water Buffalo you think the audience should know?
Well, I have two of them, and this is the second year, and I also have the last year. And they increased the horsepower, but I like the lower horsepower better because it has more torque.
More low-end torque.
It's actually a nicer bike to ride. You can just put it at 50 miles an hour. It's 2,500 RPM.
Very cool. And how long did it take you to get here from Canada?
We left yesterday. Yeah.
How many miles?
It's about 8 hours.
And how many miles?
Ooh.
I'm trying to get that
Got me
speed,
there.
folks. I'm trying to get the speed.
It's you know what? It's about 800 kilometers, so 500 miles.
About 500 miles. Well, not as bad as I thought it would be. Anyhow, fellow here all the way from Canada just to tell us about the Suzuki Water Buffalo.
Bill always talks about two-strokes and his affection for them, but government regulations have made it almost impossible for manufacturers to produce two-stroke motorcycles. Too bad. Bill says they have much to offer. Now, it was starting to rain lightly again, so Bill looked for something under a roof to look at. He found this fine antique BSA by the racing garages.
Well, folks, you've probably noticed that most of the stuff that I've been bringing you is from my era, either as a teenager or as a young man, because that's really what I have to bring to the table. I have a good recollection and memory of the period. All of these things were very important to me and have been a very important part of my life. I haven't brought you much of the earlier stuff because quite frankly, I don't have the information. When I spotted this one, a 1939 BSA, I said, boy, I hope I can find somebody that knows what they're talking about. And guess what? I've got her, and you are.
Jody Wells from Lexington, Kentucky.
Tell me about your bike. Start with the make, year, and model.
This is a 1939 BSA M20. It was a military bike used in the British service.
Okay, and it's something that apparently you got as a wedding gift.
Yeah, when we got married in 1999, it was upstairs in the storage at the shop my husband worked for. I had seen it and took a liking to it, and when we got married, one of my husband's associates, being a kind gentleman, sold it to him for $1.
Well, I'll tell you what, she thinks that was the best wedding present, and I've got news for her. The best wedding present was her husband got the right girl, that's for sure. Now, I notice it has a girder front end.
Yep, this is the finest technology 1939 had to have. They didn't have much in the way of springs and shocks back then, but the stiff, rigid, hard shell, hard frame body was the style that they used, and even up into the 50s, BSA was still sticking with that same design.
Well, you're right, and I also noticed a Smith's, I'm going to say, chronometer.
That's correct, and as far as we know, that's the original mileage on it. This bike came over from Canada. These things were transported by the thousands after the war was over. They funneled their way down into the States. This was one of a shipment of approximately 1,000 bikes that came in via Michigan.
How many miles?
Right now, we're looking at 11,867.
Okay, now you're looking at that like you're not still riding it.
Oh yeah, we ride this thing everywhere. It's the
that's great.
finest ride at 35. If you don't want to get out on the highway, it'll take you anywhere you want to go.
That's great. Now there's so many things I want to point out, but first of all, can I ask you, are you technical? I don't want to run you up a tree here.
Believe it or not, I work for the local utility. I'm a boiler operator, and so anything that goes wrong with the old electronics on this, I can take care of it, believe it or not.
Okay, let's start with the front brake. First of all, folks, I can tell you this was from my teenage years, is when we looked at brakes. What this has is a drum brake, but it's not a full shoe drum brake. It's only half of a drum brake, meaning the spokes on one side go all the way to the hub, and the spokes on the other side go to the drum, and it's got half of a drum brake. This was common even to the mid-50s.
That's right.
And it was a big performance deal when you had the full front brake.
Yeah, and believe it or not, the stopping power, when you use both the front and rear on this thing, it has even by today's standard, excellent stopping power.
Okay, let's move further a little bit now, because once again, we're looking at a flathead engine, and you might say, okay, flathead 1930s. Not true. BSA made the flathead 500 single up to the mid-50s.
Yeah, the good old side valve engine. I think this thing developed somewhere between 12 and 15 horsepower, if you can imagine that.
And believe it or not, I had an argument with a guy. I don't know what size is this. Is this a 500? Okay, it's a 500. I had an argument with a guy. This was back about 1957. A guy had a brand new one of these. He got a great deal on it from a dealer, a new 500cc flathead single. And I'm looking at him bewildered, and I'm saying, well, why didn't you want a twin or a 650 or something? And he looked at me and says, this will go 60 miles an hour. What else do you need?
Absolutely. And besides that, with just a few tools, you can actually take the top end off. You can scrape the carbon off the valves and put it back together, which was not uncommon for that period. After it had been run for a while, these things didn't have much in the way of air filters, so you would get a lot of dirt in through the carburetors, and the mechanics, the riders of the day, had to be able to work on them out in the field.
Oh yeah, decoking was a common procedure. As a matter of fact, here's a story for you folks in Chicago that knew that just recently Basil passed away from Ace Cycle World, and Ace Cycle World, of course, was the first of the big modern motorcycle dealers. But I knew him when he had a little shop on Halstead Avenue, and I walked in there thinking it was a motorcycle shop because that was what was advertised, and there was nothing but 2 or 3 used bikes and a bunch of grungy guys working on them, and he was decoking a 500 flathead single. That was my first memory of a shop working on a bike.
And today's riders, they wouldn't even have any idea what you're talking about.
No.
If you're don't have a period bike, that terminology means absolutely nothing to you.
Now, do you have rear suspension?
What's in the seat?
Okay, that was also quite common for the period, that they had rigid rear chassis, which my back couldn't take anymore today, but apparently you still ride it.
We have to ride it like a horse. You ride it light in the saddle. And just
keep a lot of weight on your legs.
Keep a lot of the weight on your legs and avoid the potholes if you can. But if you're going to hit them, just kind of stand up and ride it like a horse, and you can go anywhere you want to.
I'm going to tell you something. A lot of people don't even realize that in the early days, nobody quite knew if motorcycles or cars were going to be the successful transportation devices. And as it turned out, the cars were more practical and all that. But in the very early days, there were as many motorcycles as there were cars.
Well, yeah, and they didn't think about fuel economy and gas mileage as much as we do now, but we ride this thing for pennies a day, ride it all over our hometown. Everybody loves it and gets to see a neat piece of old history still in operation.
Well, it really is. Now, I want to thank you for spending a little time with us. By the way, we're in the noisy area of the event because this is the garage for the racers, and when they tune them, they rev them up, and that's what you're hearing in the background. Is there anything I've missed about your bike you're proud of, you'd like the audience to know?
I think we've pretty much covered it. The one thing you might notice, this is a desert model. 90% of these that you'll see are the olive green. This was a khaki. There's only a handful of these even out there, and to actually see a khaki M20 and not the olive green, it's a rare bird.
Well, that can't possibly be the original paint, is it?
Yeah, it was repainted.
Wow. Okay.
The gentleman who owned it before us said it was painted in 1953.
So painted the same color as original?
Yes. And we've stripped a few parts down to see what was underneath it, and the primer goes all the way to the metal, and you can see some of the khaki that's in there.
The original.
It's absolutely phenomenal.
I will tell you something, it's a great piece, and I'm glad to see somebody's got it that, number one, appreciates it, and number two, most importantly, still rides it.
Despite the difficult weather, we hope you're noticing what an interesting event Vintage Days has become. Everywhere you look, interesting motorcycles. As Bill was finishing up with that interview, the rain finally came, and it really rained, and everyone ran for cover. Bill doesn't give up easily and grabbed one of the riders with his bike seeking shelter.
Folks, I am absolutely drenched. I'm so soaking wet. The rain that hit was unbelievable. Only lasted about 20 minutes, and now it's dry again. But a good thing came out of it. We found a dry place to shoot inside one of these garages, and a guy that I thought was with the other group, and I said, boy, that's odd having a Harley in there. They said, no, he just pulled in to get out of the rain. Do I have it right?
Yeah, that's right. It was pouring.
And you are?
Greg Potter.
And where are you from?
Ashtabula, Ohio.
Okay, and how far is that from here?
About 150 miles.
Did you ride here on this?
No, I brought it down in my van because we also brought a motocross bike for my brother. He races motocross.
Okay, well tell me about this. What do we got here?
This is a 51 WL Harley Davidson with a 3-speed transmission.
3-speed tank shift.
Tank shift, right.
Now, have you ridden this at all?
Oh yeah, a lot. I ride it around town just for running around, bring it to the swap meets and stuff just to ride around.
Was it confusing getting used to the tank shift and the foot clutch?
Oh, of course.
Yeah, that's got to be a handful at first.
Yeah, but it's similar to a tractor.
and you have tractors. You have tractor experience.
Yeah.
Okay.
Old
What size is the engine?
It's a 750.
Okay.
This 45.
This at a time, and folks, I'll just take a moment to explain. This is actually kind of a big deal. These were the 45 cubic inch flatheads that Harley Davidson ran all over the country on flat tracking circuits for so many years. And it was also the source of huge controversy in that the rule stated if you had a flathead, it could be 750 cc's. If you had an overhead valve engine, it had to be 500 cc's. So the British machines were all at somewhat of a disadvantage.
Right.
So along comes Matchless with their G50 Matchless, which was an overhead cam 500, and it started pinning everybody's ears back, and the AMA outlawed it right away. They said, no overhead cam engines either. So no overhead cams, no overhead valves, and obviously this created huge controversy inside of the motorcycle racing world for many, many years. And finally it was changed, I want to say I'll get it right. I want to say 1969, and the reason I'm saying this is because the XR750, the Alloy XR came out in 72, and they had the Iron XR preceding it for 2 years. So 69 would have been the last year, or would have been the first year where it was 750 no matter what you had.
That's right.
Do I have it about right?
Sounds right, yeah.
It was a huge controversy. Our world is not without politics.
Correct.
Okay, what do you actually do with the bike?
I just ride it for fun. It's just a toy. I can tell it's been modified a little bit.
Yeah, but it's pretty close to original.
Yeah, most of it's original.
Right, and I noticed you've got a girder front end on here.
Yeah, that's original.
That's all original?
Yeah.
Okay, everything's, and the brakes original? No, that looks like a Honda brake.
It's a 21-inch front wheel, so it's probably a custom chopper or something.
Yeah, it looks like a Honda brake to me. Okay, he doesn't want to admit it.
But, obviously the fenders aren't original.
But I'll tell you what, it's a fooler. It really does look like a genuine antique.
Yeah.
And yet you can ride it.
I don't have that seat that sits way up in the air either, so this is kind of neat.
The stock seat, you mean?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, this is pretty cool. And you do actually, even though you didn't ride it here, you do actually ride it.
Yep. I'm on reserve now. I ran a full tank of gas out already. Didn't even realize it.
Did you really? Well, let me tell you. It's funny you should say that. Quick story. Before I got my Harley, I had a Harley KHK. That was a 55-inch flathead. 1955 or 56, if I remember correctly. And before that, I had a Whizzer motorbike, and I had a DKW 125. And the first thing that happened to me with my Harley was I ran out of gas. You know, with the other bikes, I never even paid attention to it. I'd ride for a couple of weeks, and I better put some gas in. Never thought about it. And the Harley, I ran out of gas, and one day I had a little peanut tank. These things actually do use fuel.
They use fuel, yeah.
They really do. And believe me, it was a heavy motorcycle to push the gas station too, you know?
Yeah.
Anyway,
we tend to rev the motor a lot more for some reason.
yeah, for some reason, I don't know why. Anyhow, now is there anything I've missed about your bike you're particularly proud of? You'd like the audience to know? Now, does this one have the advance on the left handlebar?
No, I just reach down here and turn it.
Do you really?
Yeah, I don't. The cable's gone off of it, so I just turn it, kick it over.
What we're talking about, folks, it used to be on the bikes of the early days, is you'd have the throttle on the right hand like what you're normal, but you'd also have a twist grip on the left side, and that would control ignition advance. What you're saying is you took that off and you just reached down and turned the distributor.
Correct.
Does it work?
Oh, yeah.
It seems so weird today.
It's easier.
It's easier. Anyhow, thanks for spending a little time with us. Apparently, you're dried out now.
I'm still a little bit wet.
I know. I'm going to go change too. I'm soaked. I
wasn't expecting that.
No, well, I was expecting it, but I was hoping not to get it. Anyhow, folks, I don't want you telling me that I didn't include a Harley.
It's true, Bill doesn't give up easily, but sometimes there really isn't any choice. As he finished with Greg and his Harley, the rain came down in torrents again. After about an hour, Bill went in search of another threshold motorcycle.
Well, folks, I'm gonna try. I don't know if you can see it or not, but it's still raining like crazy. It's a very fine mist now. Before it was just pouring, now it's a fine mist. And what a shame it is, because pretty much every historic motorcycle you can mention is here today.
Bill, sometimes it's just impossible, and you have to call it a day. Even if you're not ready to stop, we have to, because we're out of time, with only enough left to acknowledge the fine work of our award-winning production team, including Tom McGrady, Art Lauschat, our webmaster, Frank Barbalace, and Sue Casanda. Special thanks to JBTV's Jerry Bryant. Music is created for us by independent artists Roger Pauley and Jerry Herbert. Of course, we have to take a moment to thank the stars of this edition of Motorsports Unlimited: Janine Lauschat, May Chin, Amber Alvarado, and our host, Bill Wildt. Me, I'm Samantha Bentley, wondering if Bill will be able to continue with his effort to detail the technical history of motorcycle development, or come to his senses and try it again on another day. We'll see. Thanks for watching. See you next week.
This program made possible in part by support from Bridgestone Firestone and your local Bridgestone Firestone tire retailers.
This program made possible in part by support from Copy That, located in the County Farm Plaza at County Farm Road and Army Trail Road in Carroll Stream, Illinois.
Motorsports Unlimited is produced by Bill Wildt, president of the Motorsport Advancement Crusade.
This program made possible in part by support from J.C. Whitney & Company, located just off I-80 at the Utica exit in LaSalle, Illinois.
This program made possible in part by support from Jimmy's Red Hots, located on Grant Avenue and Pulaski Road in Chicago.
This program made possible in part by support from ABC Auto Parts, located on Ashland Avenue at 138th Street in Blue Island, Illinois.
Motorsports Unlimited was created to raise public consciousness, understanding, and appreciation of the motorsport community and their activities. You can contact us by email at msutv.com, or you can write to Motorsport, P.O. Box 66242, Chicago, Illinois, 60666. We enjoy hearing from our audience. Please let us know what you think.
Next week on Motorsports Unlimited, the bummer summer of 2009 continues. But I wasn't about to let it ruin my plans to detail significant motorcycles. I might not have been able to get all that I wanted, or in the sequence that I would have preferred, but I still got some great stuff. Check it out next week on Motorsports Unlimited.
So that's it, another edition of Motorsports Unlimited and the lovely ladies of motorsports. And be with us next week, because we'll have something real exciting. Bill Wildt's going to have the lovely ladies, and just about anything can happen right here on Motorsports Unlimited. Every week at this time, we bring you the best in motorsports. So, be seeing ya. Bye-bye. And Keep on rocking.